The KFC owners turned their backs on the founder, Colonel Sanders, and even tried to destroy him in one of the craziest lawsuits ever. Harland David Sanders was born in 1890 in a small four-room house in Henryville, Indiana. His father died when Harland was just 5 years old. Suddenly, the Sanders family had no income. His mother took up work in a tomato cannery and left young Harland to look after his siblings. That's when he learned to cook. At just 7 years old, he was preparing meals for the entire family. The next years were hard, not cinematic. Harland dropped out of school in the 7th grade. It wasn't out of rebellion. He simply didn't have time. He had to work. He was a farmhand at 10, a streetcar conductor by 15. He lied about his age to join the U.S. Army, was shipped to Cuba, and came back with nothing but experience. Sanders tried everything. He even tried to become a lawyer, but a courtroom fistfight with a client ended that career. It's hard to get clients when you're fighting them in front of the judge. He sold insurance, failed. He ran a ferry boat company, succeeded briefly, but then lost it. He tried a lighting company. He tried a tire company, failed again. The only consistent thing in his life was failure. But with every job, he learned something: how to talk to people, how to sell, how to run operations, how to adapt. He was 40 when he opened a service station in Corbin, Kentucky. It was 1930, the beginning of the Great Depression. People didn't have money to fix cars, but they still had to eat. So Sanders started cooking for travelers: ham, steaks, and of course, chicken. He served meals right off his own dining table. There were no menus, and eating in his house was kinda weird. But word of his great cooking spread fast. By 1936, the governor of Kentucky gave him an honorary title, colonel, not for military service, but for service to Southern hospitality. Sanders embraced it, grew out the goatee, dressed the part. The colonel persona was now born. Then came disaster. His restaurant, now a bustling cafe, burned down in 1939. He rebuilt. A few years later, the state rerouted the highway, and traffic stopped coming through Corbin. Once again, Sanders had to start over. He was in his 60s. Most men would have quit, retired, accepted that life hadn't quite worked out. But Sanders didn't stop. He packed his car with a few pressure cookers, flour, and spice blends, and hit the road. This was the genesis of Kentucky Fried Chicken. He walked into diners uninvited, cooked chicken in their kitchens. If they liked it, he offered them a deal: sell it his way, give him a nickel per sale. He wasn't building a business, he was building a belief. By 1960, there were over 400 Kentucky Fried Chicken locations in the US and Canada, all using Sanders's pressure frying method, all serving his 11 herbs and spices recipe. But Sanders himself was still not rich. He was working constantly, personally visiting franchises, sleeping in his car, making sure the chicken tasted right. And that's when John Y. Brown entered the story. Brown was young, ambitious, and aggressive, a 29-year-old lawyer with an eye for franchising. He saw in Sanders not just a great product, but a story, the white-suited icon, the homemade recipe. Brown offered Sanders $2 million for Kentucky Fried Chicken, plus a lifetime salary, stock, and a promise. The food would remain true to the original. In 1964, Sanders agreed, and that decision would haunt him. Because what Sanders didn't fully understand, what no one truly explained, was that he was giving away his identity. Not just the rights to the recipe, but to the man himself. The name Colonel Sanders, the image, the voice, the power to define what his food actually was. And within a few years, Sanders was furious. The sale should have been the ending. Colonel Sanders had $2 million in the bank, a $40,000 lifetime salary, and near celebrity status. By all accounts, he had won. He could have retired peacefully, left the world with a smile and a legacy. But Harland Sanders was not a man made for peace. Within 2 years of the sale, Sanders was fuming. KFC, now under John Y. Brown and his investors, had begun changing things. The gravy wasn't made from scratch anymore. It was pre-mixed. The chicken was still pressure fried, but it tasted different. Side dishes were industrialized. Cost efficiency had replaced flavor. To most people, these were minor changes. To Sanders, it was heresy. He called the gravy wallpaper paste and said it ain't fit for my dog, publicly, in front of cameras, in interviews. He wasn't shy about his opinion. He accused the new management of diluting everything he stood for, turning fine chicken into fast food. And yet, every box still had his his face on it. Every ad still used his name. Worse, he no longer had any control. The contract Sanders had signed in 1964 granted him a lifetime salary and the right to be a brand ambassador, but he didn't own the company. He didn't control the recipe. He didn't even own the name Colonel Sanders. KFC owned everything. Still, he couldn't help himself. Sanders visited KFC locations around the country and gave them harsh reviews. If the food was subpar, he said so, loudly. And that began to tarnish the brand. Customers were confused. Why was the man in the logo attacking the food? The final break came in 1975 when KFC tried to open a new restaurant near Sanders's home in Kentucky. They called it the Colonel's Ladies' Dinner House, named after Sanders's second wife, Claudia. Sanders wasn't involved, but the name implied he was, so he showed up. And what did he do? He criticized the menu, mocked the food, and gave a reporter an unfiltered review. Again, Sanders said the chicken was sloppy, greasy, and terrible. The gravy? God-awful. This time, KFC had enough. The company, now owned by Heublein Inc., a Fortune 500 conglomerate, filed a $122 million lawsuit against Colonel Sanders for libel, for trademark infringement, for breach of contract, essentially for being himself in public. And this is where the absurdity began. KFC had to sue the man whose face was on every bucket. The lawsuit painted him as a brand liability, a loose cannon damaging the company's reputation. Sanders, in turn, countersued for $5 million, claiming the company had used his name and likeness in ways he hadn't approved. What followed wasn't just a legal case, it was a cultural fracture between a founder who believed in soul and a corporation that believed in scale. The media had a field day. Colonel versus Colonel, one paper said, a chicken fight like no other. It was corporate absurdity at its most ironic. KFC suing the very man they had built their brand on. And the public didn't know whom to root for, the scrappy old founder with fire in his belly, or the new breed of business, polished, efficient, and detached. But Sanders wasn't backing down. He testified, called executives liars, accused them of ruining his life's work. He said, and this is a direct quote, "It's like getting a haircut. You feel fine afterward, but while it's happening, you just want to scream." Privately, KFC executives panicked. The lawsuit was making headlines, but not the kind they wanted. Customers began associating KFC with betrayal, corporate greed, and betrayal of Southern tradition, the very things the Colonel had symbolized. So Heublein dropped the suit. But they didn't apologize. They did something more strategic. They gave Sanders a new contract. They upped his salary, promised to build him his own restaurant, Claudia Sanders Dinner House, with no interference from KFC. It would be his own domain, a place where he could cook and serve food his way, without risking the corporate brand. In exchange, Sanders agreed to tone down the public criticism. It wasn't a resolution, it was containment. Sanders spent his final years still speaking his mind, but with less fire. He continued making appearances, shaking hands, and filming commercials, but something in him had dimmed. He had built a food empire, only to lose control of it. And every time he saw his face on a billboard, he knew it wasn't his anymore. Despite the legal battles and personal struggles that marked the latter years of Harlan Sanders' life, the Colonel's story is one of relentless perseverance, innovative branding, and an uncompromising commitment to culinary quality, which revolutionized the American and eventually global fast food industry.